All right, guys, good morning. Welcome back. Just getting things set up here. Still got a few minutes until it's 10. But I hope you guys are doing well, having a good day so far. Good morning, guys. It's about 4 minutes until class time, so for now, just get comfortable. At this time, no one's here in the classroom, so just gonna take the mask off, and if people show up, then I'll, put it back on. These N95 masks kind of tough to put on. Okay, thank you. Cool. Hi, Kylie. Good morning. Oh, yeah. So the office hour situation is not going to change too much. I'm just going to schedule them from, instead of 11 to 12, 11:30 to 12:30, because I finish my class meeting here at Chapman at 10:50, and then I just need about like 30 minutes to commute back to my apartment. So yeah, you'll be able to come on Friday if you wish to my Zoom office hours from 11:30 to 12:30. I always send them out the morning of. So just look for my notification on Friday morning, and then you can come. Everything's good, yeah? Just want to check on work or something? Let me know. But yeah, that'd be perfect. Thank you. Hello, how's it going?
Hey.
Hey there, no problem. I think I'm just gonna go with the one mask and face shield. That's great. Thank you, Kylie. Yeah, it'll be good. Just see a couple of people here in the live chat. Welcome back, guys. Good to see you. It's interesting class setup. It's kind of like a Senate or something. Yeah, looks like it'd be good for like debate or something. Good to see everybody. Hi, Cordy, Sebastian, Angel, Claire, Annabella. Welcome. Okay, so I guess we're good to go. Thanks, guys, for being here. Appreciate all your attendance as usual. Try to remain as consistent as you can. We have important meetings coming up in the next coming weeks. Many of the topics that we'll be lecturing on have to do with upcoming essay prompts that will be distributed later in the semester. So it's always good to just take your clear notes and keep attending as well as you can. So in any case, guys, welcome back. Today, I know that Orange County has moved to the orange tier. So that actually means that there's even more classroom seating that by policy becomes available if students want to take advantage of it or to use it. It's not that I'm encouraging it or discouraging it, but we do have seats open if anyone wants to try and attend, even if they just want to get their feet wet or sort of dabble in attendance to see how they feel being back in the class when fall comes. But you just have all your options. So I'm just mentioning that briefly as a point of order to get us started. Okay, then, so another thing too, I'm going to be finished with the midterms that I'm grading today pretty much. And so tomorrow morning, I believe I'll send off the notification that you can just check with me for your scores by email. And throughout the weekend, I'll be replying to all the student messages that I get and sending you your grade with your comments if you wish. So, the class keeps moving forward, midterms behind us, and we're just building towards the distribution of the next essay prompt. But we have a few weeks before that comes. So for now, we're just going to focus on taking good notes and reading these essays. Okay, then, so let's just go back to the material. We were talking about epistemology on Monday, and we're still on that topic. So epistemology in philosophy is the study of knowledge, sometimes called the theory of knowledge. What we're most interested in is, what is knowledge? How do humans ever acquire it? What are the different criteria that are required to have it? What's the difference between really knowing and just guessing and stuff like that? Okay, to get us onto this topic, we have to take a trip back in time to ancient Greece to learn a little bit about the writings and words of Plato and Socrates, some classical ancient Greek philosophers who gave some of the first written accounts analyzing knowledge. So part of the meeting at the beginning last time was just telling you about the life of Socrates, because he's the main character in a lot of these Platonic writings. I'm not going to go over that in detail again, but basically what you learned is that he was this brilliant conversationalist in the city of Athens in ancient Greece. He was inspiring to young people and all kinds of citizens because of the way that he would challenge people's ideas and just engage them in dialogue. But to the Athenian government, some of them didn't like him and they thought he was corrupting the youth, so they said he needed to stop or they would arrest him. He didn't stop. They did arrest him. He was prosecuted and then convicted of corrupting the youth, so they executed him. But his legacy lives on. He refused to escape. He wanted to suffer the penalty rather than be regarded in history as like a fugitive or a criminal. So his legacy lives on, and then Plato writes the dialogues that give a lot of his ideas to the world. Now, and good to see everybody here. Appreciate your guys' greetings in the morning. Welcome back as usual. Okay, so then after that, I told you guys that I needed to develop a little vocabulary within epistemology that we could all kind of refer to. So I'm just going to quickly review some of those terms and then we'll move on from there. The first was, what's a proposition? So proposition, as we learned, is the meaning of a sentence, not to be confused with the sentence itself. In some cases, we can have multiple sentences which contain the same content, the same propositional content, like the snow is white, an English sentence, der Schnee ist weiß, a German sentence, but two sentences here both say the same thing, so they have the same content and they're the same proposition. Propositions are the things that are the objects of our knowledge, the things that we either know or don't know. So we started with that. Afterwards, we defined the term truth. Truth is what happens when what the proposition says matches the facts, the reality. So if I tell you I'm wearing a face shield, this is simply true because it's not just that I'm saying it, but that's what the fact is. If I told you that I was wearing, I don't know, a beanie, that's not true, not at this time anyway. It's something I could say, but I would be saying something that's not in line with the objective facts. So true statements are the ones that match reality. We hope to mostly believe things that are true, which brings us to the next term, belief. Belief is when a person thinks that a statement is true. So two people can have two different opinions or two different beliefs, but there's just one set of facts. Say you have two jurors that don't agree about the case being made for guilt. One person says, I think this person's the killer. The other person says, I don't believe that. So they don't believe the statement that Jones is the killer, but It's not possible that he's both is and isn't. So there's one set of facts despite our beliefs sometimes being different. Then we talked about justification, okay? And justification is just having good reasons or evidence to back up and support your beliefs. So if I thought that Jones was the killer, if I had justification, it might refer to evidence collected that establishes a motive or a means or somehow places him at the scene. So evidence is what we have to have justification for our beliefs. Justification makes it likelier that a belief which is justified will be true, but it's possible to have misleading justification sometimes. Okay, and then finally we finished with epistemic agent. What's an epistemic agent? It's just a being that's capable of having beliefs or knowledge, like for example, you or me, but not so much, like the marker that I might use to write notes on the board, clearly an inanimate object, so that's outside the scope of epistemology, at least with regard to being an epistemic agent. Okay, so now with all that behind us, let's put some of these pieces together. And I'm going to tell you guys about the ancient Greek definition of knowledge. So this was all kind of a preamble to that definition. So here's what it is, which we're now prepared to say. So for the ancient Greeks, knowledge is justified true belief. And it's not just the ancient Greeks. This definition remained the dominant interpretation of knowledge in the West for thousands of years. So knowledge, justified true belief. Justified true belief. Now, sometimes in epistemology circles, people that think about this stuff a lot, they're fond of an abbreviation. And so it's simply K standing for knowledge is equivalent to the acronym JTB, or the three letters JTB. Each stand for one of these three criteria for having knowledge. So when do you, sorry for the glare, guys, I can see in the screen, but letter T is the middle letter there, JTB, if you're watching it on the screen. Okay, so knowledge is justified true belief. Now, here's the deal. These three conditions are claimed to be individually necessary, so each one is needed, but they're not enough for knowledge by themselves unless you have all three together. So like 1 out of 3 or even 2 out of 3 is not enough. They all have to be there for you to know. I'm going to try to make that seem somewhat relatable and common sense to you by going through some simple examples. So here's an example that I think is good with this. It has to do with the thought of a student taking a multiple choice test or quiz. Okay, so first of all, the student has to believe in the right answer to be given credit for knowing it, right? So like if the question on the test says, tell us when did Columbus sail to the New World, and you have 4 options. You have A, it says 1492, B, 1692, C, 1892, and D, 2030. So let's imagine the student looks at those options. They've not prepared, but they rule out D because it's the future. And in a history class, you figure it can't be that the date is the future because it hasn't happened yet. So they've narrowed it down to A, B, and C. Looking at those 3, they're like, oh my geez, goodness. I really, I don't know which one it is, but I'm just going to guess B. So they fill in 1692. Now, easy question. Does this student know the answer? No, they don't know the answer. But which criteria is missing? Well, multiple. First of all, regarding the statement 1492 is when Columbus sailed, they didn't believe it because that's not what they answered. So they didn't believe the true answer. That's one thing that they messed up. But with regard to the thing that they did believe, it's false. So you can't get credit for reporting the false, incorrect answer. If knowledge did not require truth, then we would say, hey, everything gets credit. Whether it's a true answer or false, knowledge is just both. It's true or false, it doesn't matter. But clearly that's not the case. Common sense, and you guys, you've been tested and evaluated so many times in life, so I use this as a relatable example. You can't get credit for knowing the answer when you filled in the wrong answer. So at a minimum, you have to believe the thing that is true. But even that's not enough if you don't have justification. So let me give you a slight change to the example. Suppose that the student sees these questions and these options, and they're thinking, okay, well, which one is it? I know it's got to be A, B, or C, but I have no idea which one. Which one? 1416 or 1892? Geez, I don't know. Let me just guess. 14 is my lucky number. That was my jersey number when I was in sports. So I'm going to go with A. Now, did they get the right answer? Yes. That's the correct answer. But did they know the answer? What's your intuition about that? I would say they didn't really know it. But not knowing the answer when you got the correct answer, what's the condition that's not been met? Which criteria of knowledge has been unsatisfied?
Justify?
Yes, justification. You guys understand this? Justification is missing in that case. Why? Because the student didn't know why they answered A. They couldn't give you a detailed defense of A. Now, what student knows the answer when they fill in that bubble? The student that's not just guessing, but they could tell you and explain exactly why that's the correct answer. Like they'll say, well, Columbus's birth date was this date in history. And also I know that this was the time when the ships were commissioned. And I know that this was the administration that he was living under this kind of king or queen of Spain. So a person that fills in the answer full of detailed evidence and reasons as to why it's the right answer, they really know their stuff and they knew the answer. The other person has a lucky guess, which is better than getting it wrong, but it's still not exactly really having knowledge. Okay, so for you to know anything, all three of those pieces must be there. You have to think it's true, but that's not enough because maybe you could have a false belief. So it has to also be true. But even that's not enough because maybe you're just guessing. So when you know it and it's not just a hunch or a lucky random guess, it's based on the evidence that you possess, that you could provide or describe in giving the answer or in stating what you believe to be true. Obviously, in real life, we're not taking tests all the time, but you have beliefs, and the beliefs have a status as being true or false beliefs. So if they're true and you have evidence that backs it, then we would claim of you that you have knowledge. But if any condition's not met, then the situation is not a case of knowledge. Now here, I'll just give you one more quick hypothetical or example, and then we can move into the work of Plato for today, for now. Do you guys agree that nobody could ever know that I, the professor, Dr. Vulich, am 10 feet tall in height? Is this something that anybody could ever know? That proposition?
Yeah.
You say yes. Why you say yes, though?
Because someone could look at you and see your height.
But they couldn't know this. Because knowing requires that it's what? You heard the number?
Yeah, 10 feet.
10 feet. But, I mean, come on. Am I 10?
Well, I guess they could know if you weren't 10 feet.
Well, but that wasn't my question. Could a person, you guys, in this chat, let me ask, could somebody in the world know that I am 10 feet tall? Answer that question and tell me your reasons why or why not. You tried to say that they could, but it's a strange answer because I'm clearly not 10 feet tall. So how could a person know something which is simply not true? They couldn't know it. But they could perhaps what? Let me ask. Go ahead, guys, in the chat. Give me my answer. It's not possible to know this, but why not? Why is it not even eligible to be knowledge? It's completely out of bounds for someone to know that statement because of a very simple reason. Cordy, they could not know it, but they could believe it. They could believe it, sure. So that's what I was going to go into. It's possible for someone to believe that, but they would have to be really tripping out. I mean, for someone to think that I was 10 feet tall, they would have to be on drugs. They would have to be losing their mind. They have to be seeing things, right? Because no one's ever been 10 feet tall. The highest ever person was 8'11", Robert Wadlow. That's the world record holder. But I'm certainly not 10 feet tall, nor are any other people. So it's not possible to know something about me that's not true. Just like nobody could know that I was born in 1920. This is not eligible to be knowledge because it's simply false. But I guess a person could think that if they were relying on bad information or just invented facts. So beliefs can be false, but knowledge cannot be. That's why when you write the wrong answer on the test, you can say, I believed that was the right answer, but you can't say I knew that was the right answer. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that's why I had to correct the one, but that's part of the lesson, right?
Yeah.
That's trying to make it intuitive, why truth is a requirement for having knowledge. So just false beliefs that people have, like someone thinks the world's flat, that's not knowledge. That's a belief, but it's a false belief. So knowledge requires truth. It requires accuracy, it requires justification.
I have a question.
Okay, question from a student? Yes.
So could, how to phrase this? Could like knowing that something is not true be knowledge then?
Yes. You could know that the moon is not made of cheese. You could know that the earth is not flat. So you can know the negation of a proposition for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, like you can know I'm not 10 feet tall. So if that's what you're thinking, sure. Like, and you do know that because here you can see clearly with your eyes. So you have clear visual evidence that backs up that belief. It's based on something. It's not just like randomly I'm thinking it, but I have no reason to think it. Okay. So very good.
So yeah, and Kylie, your comment, not everyone can know unless everyone measures you. Well, I was trying to just make it an easy case because I make the height a height that's impossible basically for a human to have. And it would be completely irrational for somebody to even think that I'm 10 feet tall. But I guess if they were out of their mind, losing it on drugs, whatever, then they could think this. But no one could know it because knowledge is not the same thing as just thinking something. It's getting it right and having good reasons to think it. Okay, so knowledge is justified true belief. Now that brings us finally to the words and the writings of these ancient Greeks. So the dialogue that we are studying from Plato is called the Meno. And it's called the Meno because it involves a conversation between Socrates, who is Plato's teacher, and this Greek general named Meno. So I'm going to read a lot of the passages here from the reading because it's so short that in this case at least, kind of like with the ontological argument essay way back in the beginning of the class, I can read a lot of it with you guys while we're all here together. So here's what it says. Socrates and Meno are having a conversation. So Socrates starts and he says, it's on page 343 of the book. Meno, a man who knew the way to Larissa or anywhere else you like and went there and guided others, would surely lead them well and correctly? And Meno answers, certainly, Socrates. So let me explain that little piece right there. He first refers to the city of Larissa, Socrates does. Larissa. It's Larissa. Not too important, but the only reason I mentioned it is because that's another city in Greece that's about 100 miles away from Athens where they're having the conversation. And that's also the hometown of Meno. So Socrates knows that Meno will be familiar with it. So he's asking this question to Meno. He says, Meno, if someone knows how to get to Larissa, or really anywhere else, but we're just sticking with the example of Larissa, if someone knows how to get there, couldn't they use their knowledge to accurately lead other people to the same place? And Meno says, certainly. Now, let me try and make that something that clearly makes sense to you. The basic question he's asking is if someone knows how to get somewhere, then couldn't they lead someone else that's never been there accurately to that destination? And Meno says, certainly. For example, okay, to those watching on live stream, we have 2 students in the classroom, so you guys will be helpful toward this example. Both of you guys here know for sure how to get to wherever you reside from this classroom. Like you came to this classroom from wherever your dorm or apartment or family house is, right? So you know how to get there. It would be sad if you said to me, I don't know how to get home. So you guys both definitely do know how to get there. Since you know how to get home, and you guys in the live stream can understand this, shouldn't these students be able to lead other people to that place? Like if you met a friend on campus and said, want to chill, or probably not the time necessarily now, but like, you know, play video games or hang out for a while, watch YouTube videos, you could take that person there and lead them because you know how to get there. That's a simple example. And that's what he's asking Meno, simply. If someone had gone to Larissa many times and they know the route by heart, couldn't they easily lead a new person there? And he says, yes. The point taken. That's the first part. Okay, from there, Socrates asks the second question. He says, well, what if someone had a correct opinion as to the way there, but had not gone there, nor had knowledge of it? Wouldn't they also lead correctly? And then again, Meno says, yes, certainly. So let me explain this second question. He's saying now, well, take a new example. Suppose the person does not know how to get to Larissa. They don't know, they've never done it. They never made the trip. But they have a correct opinion about how to get there. So this word correct opinion needs to be explained now. With your help, though. If I told you that correct opinion stands for 2 of these 3 criteria of knowledge, which 2 do you think it matches? Correct opinion is synonymous with which 2 of these pieces?
True belief.
True belief. Exactly. True belief. So correct opinion is a true belief without justification. With no justification. Hopefully that's visible to everybody. Correct opinion. True belief, but that is not justified. So correct means that it's true or accurate. Opinion means you believe it. But if it's just a correct opinion, which is not knowledge, that means that it's missing the other key ingredient. So think of, for example, me, if I tell you that I'm a lover of science fiction, which I do like science fiction, I guess, and then I say, I believe there's life in outer space. I believe there's extraterrestrial life. Maybe I'm correct. I feel like there's a chance that I'm correct because after all, we live on this planet. But I don't think that I know this because I don't have the right evidence to make it something I can say I know that there's life out there. So I might have a correct opinion about it. It's something that I maybe believe that could be true, but I don't have like adequate evidence to make it totally justified. So what Socrates asks Meno here is this. Suppose that someone doesn't really know how to get to Larissa because they've never gone there, but they still have a correct opinion about how to get there. Wouldn't that be good enough to be able to lead others there too? And again, Meno says yes. So let me try and bring that into your own experience a little bit with something you can relate to also. In the modern world we live in, sometimes when you're trying to get to a place, not necessarily Larissa, but wherever you're going, you know how to get there by heart. You've done it many times. Like your own apartment or house, that would be one example of that, knowing how to get there by heart. But in other cases, you don't know how to get there. You've never been there yourself. It's the first time doing it. But you still get there correctly because you rely on some type of assistance. And what is the modern mechanism that we sometimes do use to give us assistance in finding our way to a place that we don't know how to get to on our own by heart? What do you guys think?
GPS.
Yeah, like a GPS or a Google Maps, right? Some kind of navigator, Waze app or whatever it might be. So, exactly, right, Angel? Thank you. So, think of his question to Meno like this. Suppose someone has never gone to Larissa themselves, but they have an accurate map. So that's the equivalent to the correct opinion. The only thing is they've never used the map, and they don't have experience of previous trips on their own, so they don't necessarily know that the map is correct, but it is. Okay, so using a correct map or GPS system, isn't that just as effective at leading people as knowledge? And to both, Meno says yes. So I continue to read from here. Next, Socrates says, and as long as he has the right opinion about that of which the other has knowledge, he will not be a worse guide than the one who knows, since he has a true opinion, even if it is not knowledge. And Meno says, in no way worse. So then Socrates poses this question. He says, okay, Meno, so correct opinion is no less useful than knowledge? And Meno starts to answer, yes, to this extent, Socrates, but I'm going to pause for a minute while I give you guys a moment to think. Let's think about this on our own for a second. Question. Here is the question. Is there any additional value or advantage to knowing how to get somewhere versus just relying on a navigator, even if it's correct, or relying on a map, even if the map is correct? Is there any better reason that you would rather know yourself how to get there by heart than just having to use the correct map? What do you think, if anything, huh?
Like share with others, like spread your knowledge.
True, yes, but play devil's advocate a little bit. Why couldn't someone do that with the map? Couldn't they just show people the map?
Yeah. Well, they might not know how to use like a GPS, so telling them, how to get there might be better in that case.
Okay, good. Right. That's in the example specifically of using the technological interface. What if it was just a hand map? Would you say?
Not sure then.
Yeah, but I still think you're on the right track though, because there is something better about having real knowledge and having the prior experience of gone there many times. I mean, any thoughts about this or anyone in the chat? Angel, if you're not relying on something external, I am not relying on something external if I have knowledge. That's true, yes. But in a way, it's a deeper question. Why is it better to not have to rely on something external? If you have the external aid, what's the difference? What's the extra benefit? I'm only making it tough for you because I want you to think about it, but there is an answer. Now, here's the answer that Meno pretty much gives, and some of you might have been thinking this thought. It's better to know because the person who knows based on their experience will always make it there successfully. But the person who's relying on a correct opinion, they might get lost at certain times, or they might not know the route, so that if there's ever any case where they can't connect their surroundings with what the map says, they might take a wrong turn. Suppose there was like a road where the signs posted on the road have sometimes been covered or come down by bad weather. Now you might lose your way along the route because if you knew how to get there by heart, you would know all the ins and outs and alternate routes, and you'd certainly be able to navigate any kind of deviation from the course to still get there correctly. But once you lose track of how the map's instructions match up to what you're doing, you're kind of lost without knowledge, you see. So Meno says knowledge makes it so that you'll always get there, but the correct opinion will only lead you there sometimes and not all the time, so it's less reliable. I like that answer, but Socrates is being a little bit picky, and he makes him wait a little longer before he concedes the point. So here's how it goes down. Socrates says, so Meno, correct opinion is no less useful than knowledge? Meno says, yeah, to that extent, Socrates, but the man who has knowledge will always succeed, whereas he who has true opinion will only succeed at times. And then Socrates comes back and says, how do you mean? Won't he who has the right opinion not always succeed as long as the opinion is right? You know, as long as the map works or as long as the device works? And Meno says that does appear to be true. And it makes me wonder, Socrates, if it's true, why is knowledge prized more than right opinion? And why are they different? And so Socrates finally is going to give him his own answer. He says, so do you know why you're wondering, or should I tell you? Meno says, okay, by all means, tell me, Socrates. So what he's going to tell him now is why he thinks that, in fact, yes, knowledge is more valuable than right opinion, but he's going to answer in his own way. So he says, it's because you've paid no attention to the statues of Daedalus, but perhaps there are none in Thessaly. So let me explain to you a little bit of a cultural myth that is being referred to here by Socrates. It's the myth of the Daedalus statues. So let me write his name here one time on the board. This is the man's name that Socrates is talking about, Daedalus, Daedalus. Now, about Daedalus, this was a very famous and well-known sculptor in ancient Athens, Greece. And he was the most well-known and well-respected sculptor in the whole land because he would make these amazing, realistic, human-like sculptures out of marble or clay or whatever. And they were so realistic and lifelike, their appearance, that people started to develop these myths and legends about them, that if you were lucky enough to come across and acquire one of these priceless Daedalus statues, you should probably try and fasten it into the ground with ropes, secure it to the ground with ropes, because they believed that they were so realistic and lifelike that if you had one of these statues and you did not attach it by means of ropes, then when everyone was asleep and not looking and stuff, these statues, if they didn't have ropes attaching them to the ground, they probably would just what? What do you think the myth was? Yeah, that they would get up, turn to life, and just run off. So they thought that that would be the case if you didn't catch them with the ropes, so they said use ropes. Now, the point that Socrates is going to make is this. If you could get one of these statues, with the ropes, without the ropes, it's the same beautiful statue, right? But it's better to have ropes because that adds value since it keeps it there and prevents it from running off and leaving and escaping. Now, these ropes are going to be used in the metaphor. The ropes stand for justification. And the statues, which could be tied by ropes or could be free from ropes, those are correct opinions. Now, a correct opinion with no ropes, or rather, let me say this, a correct opinion with no justification is like one of these statues without ropes, meaning that if you don't justify your opinions, even if they're true, they won't stay with you for very long. You won't retain the information. Like our student that just guesses the correct answer on the multiple choice test. Try asking him the same question in a year, and if he still hasn't studied, his mind won't remember the answer because it's not based on information, you see? So true opinions leave your mind. You forget them or you change your mind about them until evidence comes forward to secure them and to prevent you from changing your mind about it or to prevent you from forgetting it. So that's how it's said here. Let me read a little more now. So he says, do you know why you're wondering, or should I tell you? By all means, tell me, Socrates. Well, it's because you paid no attention to the statues of Daedalus, but perhaps there are none in Thessaly. What do you have in mind when you say this? Says Meno. Socrates answers, that they too run away and escape if one does not tie them down, but they remain in place if they are tied down. Meno says, so what? So Socrates adds, to acquire an untied work of Daedalus is not worth much. It's like acquiring a runaway slave because it will not remain in place. But it is worth much if it is held down because his works are very beautiful. What am I thinking of when I say this? True opinions. Because true opinions, as long as they remain, are a great thing and all they do is good, but they are not willing to remain for long, and they escape from a man's mind, so that they are not worth much until you tie them down by giving an account of the reason why. And that is as we previously agreed. After they are tied down in the first place, they become knowledge, and then they remain in place. That is why knowledge is prized more than correct opinion, and knowledge differs from correct opinion because it is tied down. Meno says, yes, by Zeus, Socrates. It seems to be something like that, Old Greek, that by God, but Zeus is like the kind of godhead for them. So Socrates finishes, Indeed, I too speak as one who does not have knowledge but is guessing. However, I certainly don't think I'm guessing that right opinion is different from knowledge. If I claim to know anything else, and I would make that claim about very few things, I would put this down as one of the things that I do know. Rightly so, Socrates. And that's how the dialogue ends. So, just a little closing analysis to finish off this paper. What he's saying here is that knowledge is more valuable than having a correct opinion. And he uses the metaphor of the Daedalus statue and the rope to make the point. If you have these statues, it's great to have it with or without ropes. But having it with ropes, by comparison, is better because the ropes prevent it from escaping and leaving, and that means you get to keep it. In the same way, having a correct opinion, whether it's based on evidence or not, is good. You'd rather have a correct rather than a false opinion. So like the student that guessed the right answer, they're happy that they guessed the right answer as long as they got it right. But there's something better about not having to guess and having evidence that tells you why it's right. Because then in that case, you don't just get it right today and then forget it for the rest of your life, but you have the knowledge and you carry it with you and it doesn't go anywhere. So justification adds value to correct opinions, and that's what converts the just true opinion and upgrades it to the status of knowledge. Okay, so just true opinions without justification are lacking a key ingredient that upgrades their status to having real knowledge. So just lucky guesses, that's not it. That's not the same thing as knowing. If I sit here right now and I just guess that there's an even number of citizens of the United States under the current census, I can't tell you that I know that, but I have a 50% chance of being correct because every number is either divisible by 2 or it isn't if it's a whole number. So saying that I believe there's an even number of United States citizens, that's not the same thing as knowing it. Knowing it would require that I actually conducted the census, and then post-census, I could refer to the findings as my evidence. But sitting here in a chair just speculating, even if I'm speculating correctly, it's not the same thing as knowledge. Okay, so is this clear enough to you guys? I'd love to see if anyone had any kind of questions as we wrap up the material here of Socrates.
Can you just repeat like the way you phrased it? Justification adds value to correct opinion?
Justification adds value over and beyond having a correct opinion, because justification with correct opinion makes it knowledge, and that makes it stay with you. So the staying with you and not leaving your mind aspect is what justification adds in terms of making it better and more valuable. You know, like the statues, it's better to be able to keep them rather than having to have them today and then they run away because they weren't tied down by ropes. So having a true opinion that's not tied down by facts and evidence, that's not based on facts and evidence, is in a similar way going to escape. So here today, gone tomorrow without the ropes or without justification for your true beliefs. Don't you want to keep these true beliefs and be able to remember them and to be able to report them later confidently? If so, then you need to have evidence to back them up. Now, sometimes people like metaphors to understand things, and I think that helps in many cases. I think one little metaphor that might help you out with this definition of knowledge, justified true belief, is like, say that there were 3 ingredients that you needed to make a cake: flour, sugar, and water. Now, in reality, probably you need a few more things than that. I don't know, not necessarily a baker, right? But let's pretend that you need flour, sugar, and water. Now, each of those 3 ingredients is necessary, isn't it? But it's not enough by itself. So if you just have a bucket of water there, certainly that's something that you need to make this cake in the end. But if you don't have the flour or the sugar, it's not enough. It's just a bucket of water and it won't turn into a cake alone. And the same with the other ingredients. The flour is needed, but unless it's complemented by the other things, it can't form the cake. So think of these 3 criteria for knowledge as sort of like the 3 ingredients that bake the cake of knowledge, as it were. One of them is essential. They're all essential ingredients. You can't have knowledge without each one. But unless all 3 are together, 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3 is still not enough, and it won't be enough without all 3. Okay. So knowledge is justified true belief, or is it? That's the real tough question, because now we're going to try and show how this same definition that remained dominant and consensus for thousands of years has actually been challenged now today. And there's now some writings which indicate that this definition is somehow incomplete or insufficient. So let's fast forward thousands of years into the future to 1963. There was an American philosopher, Edmund Gettier, who basically challenged this long-standing classical definition of knowledge, and through a very short but classic paper was able to show that that definition is not quite complete, and we're still therefore looking for the right explanation of knowledge. Since 1963, I guess they say we're living in what they sometimes call the post-Gettier era. And it's a little bit disorienting and disturbing, to be honest, because it means that we don't actually have a clear fix any longer on what we think knowledge is. Not knowing what knowledge is almost like a catch-22, isn't it? Because we use the word not know in the description of not knowing what knowledge is. So in a way, we don't even know what we don't have when we say we don't know it. But I digress. So here's the guy that we're going to learn about for the moment, Edmund Gettier. I'm going to erase the board and just show you some information about him. Okay, so we've taken you all the way from like 400 BC up till 1963. And the paper that the man wrote is called, "Is Justified True Belief Knowledge? Question mark." Essentially, his answer is going to be no. Is Justified True Belief Knowledge from 1963. Now here's his name, Edmund Gettier. Edmund Gettier, he was born on Halloween of 1927, October 31st, and he's still alive. So very long and distinguished career in philosophy. This paper that he wrote called "Is Justified True Belief Knowledge" is widely considered a revolutionary classic paper, but there's some interesting things I can say about it. For one thing that's really notable about it is this is the only thing that this man ever wrote or published. And to many people in the field, this is totally surprising because it's like the ultimate kind of mic drop, if you will. I mean, he shows up on the scene. He writes this very brief, dense two-page, it's literally one front and back page, so like 2 pages, the whole thing. And it basically shows us that the classical definition of knowledge that had stood for thousands of years is somehow incorrect. He doesn't show us what the right definition is. He just opens this can of worms and then just kind of walks off the set like nobody knows what knowledge is anymore. So I'm done. But yeah, he's done a lot of work since then, obviously, as a professor, supervising graduate students, teaching classes. But he really just published and wrote this one very short piece, and then that was it for him. But it's considered very important. So I guess if you're going to write one thing, write something that everyone cares a lot about. Kind of like J.D. Salinger with Catcher in the Rye, but he did write a few other stories, so he's more prolific than Mr. Gettier was. Okay, so Edmund Gettier's paper is Justified True Belief Knowledge. Let me check in with everybody here in the live stream. I don't want to move too quickly. If there's any questions, comments, or anything else. If nothing else, just let me know that you're all good and that you're still following the lesson. I think it's important for me to periodically just check in with everyone and make sure things are good. So just give me some kind of validation and everything like that. Okay, perfect. Thanks, guys. Just checking. Thanks so much for your continued focus and attendance and participation. Okay, so let's jump into this man's work, Edmund Gettier. He starts the paper off with a couple of preliminary points, okay? One of the preliminaries is this, that it is possible to have a justified but false belief. Okay, now, we say knowledge is having justified true belief, and it is, for the most part, with some exceptions. Justification gives you a greater probability that a belief that is justified will be true. That's why we want justification, because evidence usually leads to the truth, but not in every single case. Sometimes evidence can be misleading. Sometimes we can draw the wrong conclusions from the evidence. So can anybody think of a scenario, real or imaginary, where a person would have a justified but false belief? Think of that. Who can maybe present such an example either in the chat or whatever? What do you think? Justified but false, yes?
Like the 10th person, maybe someone saw you, or like was it, on some drugs or whatever, and then saw you with on like stilts and then like was convinced that you're 10 feet.
Okay, interesting case. You talked about the example I mentioned before, someone that's hallucinating, seeing things, and they think that I'm like a really tall figure of 10 feet. Now, the use of the drugs could make it visually appear as such, and maybe if I was on stilts or something else, that could further induce the belief, but it would be false. It's a bit of an odd example, though, because we have to imagine the person that's on all these drugs, and that is not usually like the paradigm of like a patient and careful investigator of evidence, but I take the example, and it's a good one. But other more ordinary cases also are possible, right? Like, has there ever been a case in which a person was accused of a crime in court, and their lawyers were able to show that they were innocent, even though there was evidence that indicated their guilt, right? So sometimes we can have fabricated evidence, planted evidence. Sometimes evidence can be misinterpreted and could produce a false conviction. So I'm not saying that that's the norm. Of course, it's the exception to the rule, but there have been miscarriages of justice. Another example, maybe little children that believe in the existence of Santa Claus. Can they really be blamed? I mean, everyone's telling them that Santa exists, and they see it on TV and at the mall. So they may think that there's reasonable evidence towards Santa's existence, and perhaps they're justified in believing it, even though it's not really true. So anyways, you guys follow me? Examples of justified but nonetheless false beliefs. Maybe someone thought their package got stolen, but I don't know. It just didn't get delivered, or powerful, I don't know, weather currents or something somehow blew it away, like tumbleweed off of their porch or something. So I'm just saying many cases can be imagined in which a belief was justified but nonetheless false. It's not the norm, but it's the exception, and it can happen. Okay. One more possibility, just because my mind thinks of these as I'm talking. You ever heard of like a surprise party? Everyone's lying to the person, saying like, oh, your friends are all out of town and we just need you to come home to pick up like a pair of shoes that we left for you. So we'll see you next week. The guy's believing that everyone's gone. They maybe even said, oh yeah, we took a big group trip and we're leaving you behind in your city. But then he gets a surprise, we're all here. So he was justified in thinking this wouldn't happen. But of course that was false. Okay, so anyways, justified false belief is a possibility. You give the case Angel, would pseudoscience be a justified false belief? That's a tough one. I think sometimes, of course, the pseudoscientific marketers of various products want us to think that those things are justified. And, you know, I guess to a certain way of thinking about it, you could find a marketing pitch for an unnecessary or unuseful product to be justification that it is useful or good. So I would say that's probably a good example too. But a good critical thinker should not necessarily be tricked or won over by pseudoscientific claims or, you know, fallacious appeals. But that's another good example, yes, for sure. Okay, so justified false belief is a possibility. Now here's the next thing that happens in the beginning of this paper. Another preliminary point that he describes is what's called the closure principle. Now this is a bit of a technical statement, and it takes a moment to explain it fully. So let me just write this out, and then if we run out of time today, I've already accounted for that, and we'll make use of some additional time that we have next week to catch up. But anyways, here's the second preliminary point. It's called the closure principle. So I'm going to erase this stuff and create room for that. Let me write up the other preliminary first also, just so that's clear in the notes. Two preliminaries before he gets to his examples. One, it is possible, emphasis on possible because it's not like it's the norm, but it is possible anyway to have a justified false belief. Okay, and then second is this principle, okay? And here's what it says. So if some individual S, S is just a placeholder for an epistemic agent. So if S, we use that as a label because it could be any number of people. So like that's a variable, but it could stand for, you know, me, you, or anyone else. So if S, some epistemic agent, is justified in believing okay, so if S is justified in believing P, some proposition, and that proposition P entails another proposition Q, okay, so we've got a little more to put up here, but so far it's what it says. If S is justified in believing P, and P entails Q, and S, the subject, deduces Q from P, make sure I'm not getting into glare, deduces Q from P, then in that case, S, the subject, is also justified in believing that Q. Now I know it has a bit of a technical look and feel at a first glance, but in the end it's not too bad, and we'll explain it. So then S is also justified in believing Q. So this here is called the closure principle. That's the sort of technical term for it in epistemology circles, the closure principle. So let me try and explain this in a way that's not too bad to understand. All that it's saying is that if you have justification for one belief, and then that belief or proposition implies another one, then you would also be justified in believing the second thing that is implied by the first, okay? So for us to really get further into this, we have to recognize what the word entail means. What is entailment? So entailment is a logical relationship that exists between two propositions or sentences. So take A and B to be two related statements or propositions. If A entails B, okay, suppose that A entails B, then how do you think the remaining part of the sentence would complete? When A entails B, then whenever A is true, what do you think must be the case with B? If A I'll put it in the chat. So there, I wrote the first part of the definition of entailment, and below I just said, what do you think would be the remaining final part of that definition? So when A entails B, yes, very good, Cordy. If A entails B, then whenever A is true, B must also be true. Okay, good. So I'll write it now in full. Okay, so there it says in the chat, if A entails B, then if A is true, B, with all caps emphasis, must also be true. All right, so that's the concept of entailment. If A entails B, then the truth of A guarantees the truth of B. So like, for example, let me ask you this. Here's a fact about me. I was born in the 1980s, so I'm quite old, but that's fine. I was born in the 80s. So what is something that entails? That's one statement. Dr. Vulich was born in the 1980s. There's many things that entails that would, like, in other words, see the definition, that would have to be true if that first statement is true. So can you tell me some second statement that is entailed by Vulich was born in the 80s? Maybe do some math, but think, you come up with something. That's the question. What's B? If A is, Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s, yes?
Your parents have to have been born earlier than the 80s?
Yes, correct, fair enough. I'm not a clone, so correct. I mean, given the age that people are able to, have natural birth and stuff, it is entailed that my parents are, how'd you put it?
Had to be born earlier.
In a previous decade before the 80s, sure. So Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s, entails that my parents were born before the 80s. But I mean, in a way, you can't necessarily know that. Couldn't it possibly be that someone was born January 1st of 1980 and then somehow conceived children on December 31st, 1989? I'm not saying that's likely at all. But no, I get your point. It just leaves a little room for possibility. But my parents definitely were born before the 80s, so yeah. Well, that's one example. You guys here in the chat, take over. Tell me something that is entailed by Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s. Or any pair of propositions you like, if you want to give another example. I was just going with this one to start. But you were alive when Bill Clinton was elected in 92. Fair enough, yes. There's no case where a person's born in the 80s, dies for a while, then comes back to life. So yes, fair enough. If I was born in the 80s, which I was, then you can entail that I was alive during Clinton because now it's 2021 and that was in the 90s, which was in between the 80s and now. So that's fair. Here's another one, quick question. If I was born in the 80s, does that entail that I'm over 30? Yes, it does. That's obvious, right? That's a yes or no. So if I was born in the 80s, the statement that I'm older than 30 has to be true. It's not like there's an option where I could be born in the 80s, but also I could just be 25. That's not mathematically possible. So I'm only giving you a few examples so you know how entailment works. One last example, and then we'll close for today because we'll pick up at this on Friday. But all dogs are mammals, right? So if I was petting a dog, doesn't that entail that I'm petting a mammal? Yes. because since all dogs are mammals, it's not possible to yes, be petting a mammal. Sorry, yes, be petting a dog, but no, not be petting a mammal. So petting a mammal does not entail petting a dog because there's many other mammals besides dogs, but petting a dog does entail petting a mammal because every dog is a mammal. Okay, well, last word then is this. Having now explained what entailment means, all this principle is saying is that if you've got justification for believing one statement, then you're also justified in believing anything that logically follows from that statement. Okay, so like you guys are justified in believing that I was born in the 80s. Why? Because I just told you myself, so you heard it from the person themselves. Since you're now justified in believing that I was born in the 80s, you're furthermore justified in believing whatever is logically entailed by that. So if it's logically entailed by that I'm older than 30, you're justified in believing that too now. Or if it's logically entailed by that I was alive during the Clinton administration, then you're justified in believing that as well. So the justification transfers over from one justified belief to those others that are entailed logically by it. And that's as far as we can get today in today's meeting. So
It's like the transitive property.
it's a transitive property, yes. Justification transfers over from one proposition to the logical consequences that it has. So like when you do deduction, when you're like, this person's DNA is on the murder weapon, that entails that they must have handled the murder weapon. You're justified in believing the second thing if you're justified in believing the first. So anyway, justification crosses over from one statement to another that follows from it. Okay, guys, thanks so much again for your attendance. Make sure to keep coming. I don't want to see these numbers go down at all. I really appreciate it, though. Have a great day. And I'll be done with the midterms later today. Tomorrow, I'll be sending off the announcement that people can check with me over the weekend for their scores. And so through the whole weekend, I'll be replying to student messages and grade requests. But be alert for that. That'll be sent off tomorrow morning or afternoon through Canvas. So for now, then, have a great day. Take care again. Let me see in the chat that everyone's good. Thank you, Angel, Cordy, and all the rest. Have a great one then. Take care and stay safe. I'll be in touch. By the way, we're at orange tier now. So they're saying there's more classroom capacity. I'm not necessarily encouraging or discouraging, but if any students do want to try and make an attempt at attendance in class, I'm okay with that. Maybe you could email me to let me know, but we certainly seem to have enough room in the classrooms that I'm in at least. So we could handle a couple more if anyone is interested. But just let me know. But for now, have a great day. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care. See you next time.